Sean Grayson was not only the top genius of the Herbalist Society's younger generation, but also the son of one of the organization's leaders. But Kevin refused to let him have the Royal Heart crystal herb. Angered by this, Sean sent his two subordinates to teach Kevin a lesson. However, Kevin shocked everyone by making quick work of the two men before turning his attention back to Sean, who stumbled to the ground while retreating. Fearing for his life, Sean began to tearfully plead for mercy. Hearing this, Kevin's anger suddenly cooled. He now felt pity for Sean Grayson, even though he was obviously not worth even a second thought from Kevin. Although Sean Grayson deserved to suffer the consequences for his actions toward Larry Barnes today and his overall bullying of these stall owners, if what he said was true, Kevin couldn't bring himself to do something that could threaten his life. Just as Kevin was thinking about these questions in his mind, Sean Grayson, who was lying on the ground, suddenly revealed a vicious expression. He then waved his right hand and released colorful smoke. "Be careful!" a voice suddenly rang out. Only then did Kevin come back to his senses and quickly retreated. Sean was playing a trick on him. However, no matter how fast Kevin was, the colorful smoke still touched his sleeve and almost instantly rotted his clothes. If it wasn't for the protection of his body's spiritual energy, he probably would have lost his right hand, and even the floor underneath him that was contaminated by the colorful smoke would have crumbled and formed a large hole. From just a tiny bit of smoke, there had been a great amount of damage. It was obvious to see that Sean did have powers, though Kevin knew immediately that they were directed in the wrong way. Kevin's pupil shrank to the size of a needle tip. A raging anger instantly rose in the depths of his heart once again. He was actually deceived by Sean Grayson. Then again, how many people in his position would dare believe that Sean Grayson's cowardice was actually just an act? Therefore, before the matter was completely over, Kevin learned that neither party should relax too much or directly jump to conclusions, because no one could guarantee what kind of turning point could be right around the corner. What you just encountered is the Grayson family's signature poison, the 7 deadly life-taking powder. Larry Barnes swiftly took out a small black pill from his pocket. He then handed it to Kevin and instructed, "Take this pill quickly. Your spiritual energy can only hinder the poisonous fog on the outside. However, your body has actually absorbed a significant amount of poison from standing too close to him." Given the urgency of the situation, Kevin didn't have time to think too much about his words before he swallowed the pill. "That's cute, but you won't live for long even if you take that pill. The Grayson family's signature poison can only be cured by special medicines. If Mr. Barnes could concoct the antidote, then he wouldn't have been defeated by my father many years ago. But instead of rising up the ranks of the Herbalist Society, he's been selling items here on the second floor of the internal market for decades." Sean Grayson laughed out loud at the both of them. "Anyway, you still have 5 minutes before the poison fully breaks out. In the meantime, why don't you kneel down and beg me for mercy? Maybe I will give you the antidote if I'm pleased by your effort." Despite this, Kevin tried his best to turn a deaf ear to him. At this moment, his body felt extremely uncomfortable as the 7 deadly life-taking powder had already begun to take effect on his internal organs. The intense burning sensation made his chest feel as if he was inside an oven. At the same time, the poison's effect on the rest of his body was the complete opposite. His limbs were extremely cold, and the fine hairs on the surface of his skin had all stood up. Apart from this, while there seemed to be no changes to his head on the surface, Kevin could clearly feel intense pressure. It was as if his entire head had been soaked in water. Moreover, his brain felt as if it had swelled so much that it burst out of his skull at any moment. Right now, the only thing that kept Kevin alive was his spiritual energy protecting his heart from being infected by the poison. "Hand the antidote over." Kevin shook his head hard and finally uttered through gritted teeth. Those who had never felt the 7 deadly life-taking powder's effects would never understand how Kevin felt at this moment. The pain was so excruciating that it would make anyone wish they were dead. "You want the antidote? Dream on!" Sean laughed proudly. Kevin frowned when he saw this. No longer caring where this place was, he quickly rushed forward and grabbed Sean Grayson's throat. "I'm telling you one last time, hand over the antidote." "Never! You can't blame anyone but yourself for meddling in other people's business today. Remember to be a smarter person in your next life. You can't get involved in things that don't concern you. Otherwise, you'll end up offending people whom you shouldn't offend and suffer the same fate all over again." Although Sean was currently struggling himself from being choked to death, there was no fear in his eyes. After all, it was only a matter of time before Kevin would undoubtedly die. He only needed to withstand him for 2 to 3 more minutes to be safe and sound. "Let's see who will have the last laugh between us." A cold light shot out from Kevin's eyes as he had now completely unleashed the pressure of a level 5 expert. Everyone who was watching the show suddenly heard a crackling sound, and Sean Grayson's eyes widened in extreme horror. A second later, he let out a painful roar as Kevin grabbed his neck with one hand and crushed his left shoulder with the other. "You..." Sean was in so much agony that he could no longer speak in full sentences. His face was twisted, and his eyeballs looked as if they were about to pop out. "Give me the antidote. Otherwise, even if I die, I will make sure to crush all the bones in your body first before my final breath. That way you will live like a useless piece of trash for the rest of your life." Due to the discomfort in his body, Kevin's voice started to become hoarse and labored. "You... how dare you?" Sean stared at Kevin disdainfully as he did his best to endure the intense pain. Although Kevin didn't say anything to answer him, he made a firm move and kicked Sean Grayson's knee. Due to the heavy force that was dealt, everyone present could clearly see that Sean's right leg and thigh were now bent at an incredible angle. At the same time, the heart-piercing pain that this inflicted almost made Sean Grayson faint on the spot. But even though he was still conscious, his face looked as pale as death. Seeing this, Kevin let out a cold snort. Deep down, he knew that there weren't many things left for him to do, and he didn't have much time left either as the discomfort in his body had increased once again. Without wasting any time, he was about to cripple Sean Grayson's other leg. But before he could do so, Sean screamed to stop him. I don't have the antidote." He couldn't bear the pain anymore. Kevin was like the devil incarnate, giving him no chance to buy himself any more time. "The 7 deadly life-taking powder is a poison concocted by my father. In the entire herbalist society, only he has the antidote. Now let me go. I really don't have it." Sean's face twisted in pain as he told Kevin the truth. At this rate, he was truly afraid of dying, and also of dying next to the man who was going to kill him during his own last breaths of life. "In that case, it seems like there's no need for you to live." Kevin increased the strength in his hands even further as he spoke. Obviously, he wanted to take Sean's life after learning that this man had been lying to him the entire time about having the antidote in his possession. "Stop!" a voice suddenly sounded. Kevin's lip curved up slightly when he heard it. Finally willing to come out? For a while now, Kevin felt that someone was secretly observing him on the second floor. It was just that he never had the chance to force this person to show himself. Just then, a figure quickly appeared from a dark corner not far away. He looked like an old man in his 70s, and the expression in his eyes gave the impression that he was wiser and more powerful than anyone else present. He also emitted an unusual aura, which was on par with the 2 old men in blue and white who had been following Commissioner Reeves all around. "Who are you?" Kevin frowned slightly and said with an unpleasant expression. However, he secretly sneered in his heart. It was exactly as he had expected. Up until his arrival in Washington, D.C., Everything he had heard and seen about the Herbalist Society was on a surface level. But after spending some time here in Herbalist City, Kevin was beginning to realize something. Like the internal market, the organization had several layers to it, and beneath the surface, the Herbalist Society was indeed full of dangerous figures that were hiding in plain view. There was a reason that Kevin had his battle with Sean Grayson in the market today, and that reason was now standing before him. Sean Grayson proved to be a devilish enemy. He tricked Kevin and released the 7 deadly life-taking powder on him. Moving painfully toward death, Kevin demanded the antidote from Sean, who refused to give it to him. And then, after being nearly beaten to death by Kevin, revealed that only his father, an Herbalist Society member, had the potion. From the shadows came an aged man with a powerful aura, and Kevin knew that this man held secrets which he was anxious to learn, as well as, Kevin hoped, the antidote. Without knowing how deep into the rabbit hole he currently was, the true strength of the Herbalist Society still remained a mystery to him.
Mr. Williams, can you save me some embarrassment regarding today's matter? Sean Grayson is the only son of one of the Herbalist Society's leaders. If you kill him, I wouldn't know how to explain it to Mr. Grayson.
The old man remarked with a faint smile as he took out a green pill from his pocket. He then flicked his finger to hand it over to Kevin.
This is the antidote to the 7 deadly life-taking powder. Take it and you will be safe and sound. Now, can you take a step back and leave Sean to me?
Kevin didn't have time to care whether the pill was real or fake, so he quickly consumed it. In just a few seconds, he could clearly feel that all of the negative effects in his body had disappeared. You're really interesting. You haven't even answered my question yet, and you want me to let him go the moment you appear? So tell me, who are you? And why should I spare him? Kevin crossed his arms in front of his chest and asked coldly. He wanted to kill me just now, so he can only blame himself for not being as strong as me and finding himself nearly killed by my hands. At the end of the day, we're all adults here. If we make a mistake, we will have to accept our punishment. Otherwise, don't tell me that the Herbalist Society promotes bullying others with their power.
Mr. Williams, is there really no room for negotiation on this matter?
The old man's expression didn't change, and that made it harder for Kevin to read what his intentions were.
Let me answer your question first. My name is Rodney Hendricks, and I'm the person in charge of the 2nd floor of this internal trading market. If someone were to die here...
Although Rodney Hendricks didn't finish his sentence, the meaning he wanted to express was already very clear. But the problem is, why should I give you that courtesy? Kevin stared coldly at Sean Grayson, who was now hiding behind Rodney Hendricks, and pointed to him. That man is an arrogant bully who threatens people with violence. I don't know how many people he's pushed around here, but his background shouldn't give him an excuse to act this way towards others. In that sense, killing him could be considered like eliminating a huge pest from the entire Herbalist Society. Kevin added, besides, if you really wanted to save his life, then why did you wait until the last second before coming forward? If I was the one lying here today because my skills were inferior to others, would you do the same thing for me? I believe you wouldn't even bother to say a single word or bat an eye at that incident. So even if Commissioner Reeves were to come here and plead for that man's life, I wouldn't give in to his request. His tone was firm, leaving the surrounding people shocked and barely able to get out a whisper. This young man is definitely a ruthless person. He actually doesn't even respect Mr. Hendricks? This is the first time I've witnessed such boldness. Someone said quietly to no one in particular.
Didn't you hear what he said? If even the commissioner dared to ask this favor, he wouldn't accommodate it. You have to admit, he certainly has guts.
Another added. I just don't know if this kid really has a solid background. or if he's simply too naive to know that he's messing around with people you shouldn't mess with. Does he even know what the commissioner and Mr. Hendricks are capable of doing to him? A third one scratched his head. The surrounding people continued to discuss amongst themselves this confrontation between the two of them. Rodney Hendricks silently placed his hands behind his back. His eyes, which were slightly lowered, revealed a look of thoughtfulness. The more he processed Kevin's words, the more he realized what Kevin said was reasonable. If the situation was reversed and Sean Grayson had the upper hand over Kevin, Rodney would not have come out to get involved in this mess. But now that Sean Grayson had put himself in this dire situation, Rodney wanted to scold him 1,000 times in his heart for having to intervene as a mediator. As the saying goes, you can do whatever you want as long as you have the ability, but if you don't have diamonds, you shouldn't get involved in the work of drilling through porcelain. Being used to intimidating all of these stall owners, an arrogant bully like Sean Grayson never really learned the ability to choose someone that he could pick a fight with. But this time around, could he afford to provoke someone like Kevin? It seemed that if he couldn't bully his way out of this, his life would be in danger instead. Prior to this, very few people within the Herbalist Society knew that Rodney Hendricks was actually part of the Graysons faction, which was why Sean Grayson was so used to bullying people on the second floor without any fear. Since everyone was afraid of his father and knew that Rodney Hendricks had a penchant for turning a blind eye to his actions, none of the stall owners dared to speak up against him. All of this turned into a vicious cycle that kept inflating his ego, which was why his personality became more and more unpleasant and threatening each time he dropped by for a visit. Initially, Rodney thought that today's matter would be no different. In the end, if things got slightly out of hand, he thought he could just come over and use his charm and identity to quickly settle any dispute. However, he did not expect that Kevin was actually the kind of person who would never let go so easily. Now, not only was he unwilling to resolve the matter, but he had also caused Rodney Hendricks some humiliation in front of everyone here.
Young people should be forgiven when they have to. Sean Grayson is still a child, so it's reasonable that he would inevitably make some mistakes. Why do you have to force me to explain things step by step? It won't do you any good to make things worse.
Rodney could only roll out a few sentences that were neither offensive nor bothersome. It was his job now to smooth over this unpleasant situation. That's ridiculous. You say that he's just a kid, but I'm not that old either. So why am I the only one being bullied here? Is it because this is the Herbalist Society's territory? Kevin wasn't afraid at all, and he didn't show any signs of admitting defeat in terms of his words and tone.
That's right. This is the territory of the Herbalist Society. All of the rules here are set by us, not the government. If you can't accept it, then get the hell out of here.
A low and hoarse voice came from the entrance. Everyone's facial expression suddenly changed when they heard it. Larry Barnes' reaction was the most intense of them all. His body trembled violently for a while before he clenched his fist tightly to hide his emotions as best as he could. However, his eyes were clearly filled with a combination of fear and hatred. A middle-aged man wearing a dark uniform and two men who looked like subordinates walked over quickly. The man raised his head high and looked down upon everyone as if he was looking at them with disdain. Meanwhile, Sean Grayson became excited upon seeing this person's arrival as a strong smile emerged on his face. At the same time, Rodney Hendricks also heaved a long sigh of relief. The reaction of these two men clearly confirmed the identity of the person who had just walked in. It was none other than the legendary chief herbalist of the Herbalist Society, Clint Grayson. "Dad!" Sean Grayson excitedly greeted him.
You still have the nerve to call me Dad? You only know how to cause trouble all day, every day, without having the ability to deal with it after the fact. I'm sick and tired of always having to clean up your messes for you.
Clint Grayson glanced at his son indifferently, then opened his mouth and scolded him. "Dad, you really can't blame me for what happened today. It was this man who came here and started everything. All I did was take an interest in the items from Mr. Barnes' stall. However, that man came out of nowhere and tried to seize them by force. He even injured 2 of my men." Sean Grayson exaggerated what had just happened, making himself appear as the innocent victim. "Dad, you have to punish him for me. That kid is extremely arrogant. He didn't even show any respect to Mr. Hendricks. He said that he wouldn't care at all even if you and Commissioner Reeves were here. If you hadn't arrived here just in time, he would have definitely killed me."
Enough. Don't think that I don't know what happened.
Clint glared disapprovingly at his son. If it wasn't for the fact that he was his only son, Clint Grayson probably would have already disowned Sean Grayson a long time ago. He was simply too much of a headache for him to deal with. Ignoring his son, Clint Grayson quickly gave a light nod to greet Rodney Hendricks, then walked past them as he headed straight over to Kevin. Everyone in the crowd wondered just what was going to happen between these 2 men in the next few moments. Rodney Hendricks gave Kevin the antidote to the 7 deadly life-taking powder and then asked Kevin to let go of Sean Grayson. Kevin refused and insisted that Sean had to pay the price for his constant bullying of the stall owners and for trying to kill him today. Sean's father and the Herbalist Society's chief herbalist Clint Grayson arrived and heard an exaggerated account of the incident. Clint saw through Grayson's lies and expressed his disappointment for having to clean up his mess yet again. The moment the incident started, Rodney Hendricks began to take a video of the events and sent it to Clint Grayson through his phone. In fact, the reason why he had talked so much nonsense with Kevin just now was to stall for time, knowing that Clint would arrive at any moment. Kevin was the type of talented herbalist in whom Clint Grayson was sure to take an interest, and he was already at Kevin's side questioning him politely.
Kevin, right? I know the cause of the incident. First of all, I would like to apologize to you for the mistakes that my son has made. But isn't it normal for young people to have some minor conflicts? Now that you are safe and sound from the poison's effects, and the item you took interest in is already in your hands, this should be the end of the matter, and we can all move on. What do you think?
Clint Grayson said in a matter-of-fact tone as his eye swept across Kevin's body. Mr. Grayson, as expected of the Herbalist Society's chief herbalist, the way you speak is not something that an ordinary person can compete with. But I want to ask you, what right do you have to say that this matter has been settled? Kevin stared at Clint Grayson as if he was looking at a fool.
What do you mean?
Clint was shocked for a second, and then his expression turned gloomy.
I haven't even cared about you injuring my men and my son. You just don't know what's good for you, do you? Do you believe that I won't be able to kick you out of this place with just one snap of my fingers?
I really don't believe it. But before you touch me, you have to think clearly about your next move. I can understand your son's ignorance, but as a father, you should be more sensible. Kevin mocked him in a strange tone.
Kid, do you really have a death wish or something? It seems that you're the one who's looking for trouble without considering the consequences.
Clint frowned and stared into Kevin's eyes with his brows furrowed. He really couldn't figure out what kind of confidence Kevin had to speak to him in such a bold manner at the moment. After watching the video of the incident that Rodney Hendricks had sent him, Clint Grayson had already found out about Kevin's past on the way over here. Although he had won the preliminary round of the competition, Clint had no reason to believe that Kevin was a particularly conceited person based on everything else that he had accomplished before coming to Washington.
It seems that young people really don't know the difference between heaven and earth. Do you understand the principle that there is always going to be someone better than you? Don't think that just because you've already attained some achievements at your age, you can be arrogant wherever you go. You need to understand how deep the waters run around here. If you're willing to lower your head and apologize to me for what you said earlier, I can let bygones be bygones.
Clint was somewhat unsure about what to make of Kevin as he couldn't see through what he was thinking right now. In the past, in Herbalist City and even in Washington, anyone who heard Clint Grayson's name would immediately be very respectful when they saw him. However, Kevin's current attitude was too different from what he was used to. He seemed so calm that it was slightly unnerving for Clint. Nowadays, young people who dared to be this confident in themselves either had a fearsome background or were ignorant fools. However, Clint Grayson felt that Kevin definitely did not belong to the latter category.
Young man, you don't have to pay such a painful price for your recklessness. You're still young, which means that you will still make a lot of mistakes in your path of growth. In light of that fact, let this incident serve as a learning moment for you,
Clint advised. As he listened to Clint Grayson's earnest teachings, several lines appeared on Kevin's forehead. What the hell was going on? Why are you talking so much nonsense? Do you want this matter to be resolved or not? Anyway, I'm standing here in front of you now, and your son was indeed beaten up by me. In any case, it's impossible for you to make me apologize. So if you want to try to kill me, then bring it on. Kevin put his hands on his waist and firmly stood his ground. No matter what, Kevin wasn't willing to lower his head to Clint Grayson and his son.
Dad, just kill him. This guy has made me lose all my dignity today. If you let him go so easily, how am I going to go out and show myself in public in the future? Moreover, since I'm your son, wouldn't you also become the butt of jokes in the Herbalist Society? Your current position won't protect the reputation that you've painstakingly built over decades from going down the drain in an instant.
Sean Grayson clamored fiercely as he tried to fuel his father's anger to exact punishment on Kevin. Obviously, he didn't want to leave Kevin with any chance of survival.
Shut up!
Clint scolded his son fiercely. After that, he quickly scanned his surroundings as if Sean had said nothing, but he still caught the meaning behind his previous words. He then turned his attention to Larry Barnes.
It seems that today's matter was caused by you. It has been many years since I last saw you, Larry. It's good to know that some things never change even after all this time, as you still have that bad temper of yours. And even though your life has fallen into such a sorry state, you're still as stubborn as ever. Had I known that this was how you were going to repay me for keeping you around, I wouldn't have let you go so easily back in the day. Instead, I should have chased you out of Herbalist City when I had the chance.
Larry Barnes's withered body started to tremble violently when he heard this. As he gritted his teeth in anger, it seemed like he couldn't hold his temper much longer and was ready to fight Clint Grayson to death today. Kevin turned his head slightly and glanced at Larry Barnes. Although he didn't know what had happened between the two of them in the past, it was obvious that Clint Grayson decided to provoke him because he was looking for a way out.
Clint, stop talking nonsense in front of me. I don't need to say anything more about all the dirty tricks you used to win against me back then, but do you think I will let you succeed if you try again?
Larry Barnes's chest heaved up and down as he spoke. This was enough to prove to Kevin just how intense the resentment in his heart was.
Don't be so bitter about the fact that since beating you, I've risen up to the ranks of the Herbalist Society as its chief herbalist, while you're just a measly stall owner who's struggling to make ends meet. After all, the winner takes all the glory. This has always been the way things work in life.
Clint sneered while giving him a disdainful look.
Besides, who do you think you are to call me out like that? You're just a pitiful loser who's stuck in the past. So why should I compete with you again? At the end of the day, the world will only remember the winner. They won't care to remember whether it was won through fair or shameless means."
Clint Grayson's face suddenly became ferocious.
You would be living and eating in the dark corners of the sewer by now if the Herbalist Society didn't take pity on you as a member. But now that you no longer seem to value your existence and insist on provoking me and my family, how do you want to die after causing today's incident?
Due to rampant inequality, the world had become a cold and harsh place to live in for those who belonged to the bottom rung of society. No matter how hard they worked in order to get ahead in life, they were always looked down upon by those who were in a much better position, by those who would sometimes even find enjoyment in stepping on them like rocks under their feet. Feeling like they were never afforded a fair shot at success, these people could only feel helpless in the face of such mistreatment. This was the case for Larry Barnes, whose life started going downhill after losing to Clint Grayson in a crucial competition 20 years ago. At that time, not only did he lose his wealth and future, but he also lost his family. Losing everything that he had worked so hard for, as well as the people he cared about the most, made him feel like he had lost completely in life. Like Washington, D.C., Herbalist City was also a cruel place to live. If you wanted to succeed, you had to be willing to challenge and defeat your fellow competitors. Only then could you climb to a higher position. If you won, you would be rich and honored with praise by others. But if you lost, you would only be able to exist in the shadows, where no one cared whether you lived or died. Facing Clint Grayson's question, Larry Barnes seemed to have grown excited at first. For a moment, it looked as if a fire was about to be reignited from within. But suddenly, he loosened his fists and just stood there blankly, as if he had lost all his strength and will to fight back just as quickly. Although he had always hated Clint Grayson in his heart, and even dreamed of ripping him to shreds and taking revenge for losing everything because of him, the reality was that Larry Barnes no longer had the courage to face him head-on ever again. Back when he was in his most youthful and vigorous self, he had completely lost to Clint Grayson. Now he was like an old and rusty anchor that had sunk deep into the water. What right did he have to fight with a man who was at the peak of his career? Larry Barnes knew that fate had led his life down a horrible path, and even worse was the fact that he, at his age and with his status, could do nothing about it even when facing his worst enemy, Clint Grayson. Clint Grayson's apologies to Kevin for his son Sean's behavior did not get the response Clint expected. Kevin didn't forgive Sean's behavior toward him and toward Larry Barnes, and instead calmly said he would fight both father and son. Surprised by Kevin's cold and calm words, Clint turned his anger toward Larry Barnes, whom Clint had beaten in an herbalist competition decades before, after which their lives went in different directions.
What do you want?
Larry Barnes lowered his head and asked weakly, like a deflated balloon.
What do I want? Today's matter has escalated to such an extent that you can no longer escape punishment. You can only use your life as compensation for your wrongdoing.
Clint Grayson stared fiercely at his opponent from many years ago. Larry's eyes were filled with fear.
This is Herbalist City. You can't act so recklessly. The commissioner had already warned you before, so you can't do anything threatening to me. That was 20 years ago. Do you think anyone still remembers that?
Clint responded coldly.
Besides, Commissioner Reeves isn't here at the moment, so he cannot save your life.
As soon as he said these words, Clint Grayson suddenly sent a fist toward Larry Barnes' chest. Unfortunately, because Larry didn't have enough time to dodge this at such a close distance, he simply closed his eyes and accepted his fate, thinking that he was about to take a heavy blow. However, Several seconds passed, but the pain that he had imagined had still yet to come. Only then did Larry Barnes slowly reopen his eyes to see what had happened. He didn't know when Kevin had arrived in front of him, but his body was emitting a strong blue light. It was he who had helped Larry avoid getting hit by Clint Grayson's fist. Kevin had stepped in the way to block the punch. Is he really the chief elder of the Herbalist Society? For someone with that position, this guy's strength isn't as powerful as I thought. Kevin raised his eyebrows and thought to himself. He then returned some force with his own hand, forcing Clint Grayson to take 4 or 5 steps back.
I didn't think you would care about me punishing a piece of trash like Larry Barnes.
Clint suddenly looked at Kevin with fear. In this confrontation between the two experts, Clint Grayson could clearly see the difference between the two. Kevin was able to easily block his punch without any preparation, which was enough to prove that his strength could not be underestimated. I have a big problem with bullies like you. Whenever I see injustice, I immediately feel compelled to help those in need. Now, since you said that you wanted to punish this stall owner, I would like you to explain something to me. What exactly was the crime that he committed? Kevin crossed his arms in front of his chest and asked indifferently.
Kevin, you don't look like an idiot. Can't you see what I'm trying to do?
Clint's face became extremely gloomy. It was obvious to him that Kevin wanted to fight. Can you make things clearer for me? I can't seem to figure out what he did wrong, and I don't like to accept vague hints as an answer either. Kevin stood firmly in front of Larry Barnes and retorted without any change in expression. Anyway, today's matter can only be resolved between us, regardless of other people's involvement. If you have any problems, just come at me. Hearing this, Clint frowned.
Do you really think that I won't dare to fight you? Let me remind you that this is the territory of the Herbalist Society. I am. You really are an idiot, aren't you?
A loud shout suddenly sounded from not far away, forcefully interrupting Clint Grayson's words. Everyone was stunned at first, then they quickly turned their heads to find out who it was. They then saw Vincent Reeves walking over with anger written all over his face.
Commissioner Reeves!
Clint quickly walked up to greet him and lowered his head to him respectfully. A second later, Vincent Reeves suddenly slapped Clint Grayson across the face with all his might. Everyone watching was completely caught off guard by this. Even the person on the receiving end of the slap, Clint Grayson, only regained his senses after a long while. He then slowly turned his head back to look at Vincent Reeves, who was standing in front of him.
Commissioner Reeves, what is the meaning of this? You don't understand why I hit you, right?
Vincent Reeves narrowed his eyes and answered coldly.
If my intentions weren't clear enough, I didn't just want to slap you. I actually wanted to kill you.
Vincent Reeves then grabbed a few strands of hair on Clint Grayson's head and pulled him in front of Kevin.
Open your eyes and take a good look. Who is the person standing in front of you? Do you think Kevin Williams is someone you can mess with?
Vincent Reeves roared in anger.
Has being chief herbalist all these years made you so ignorant and arrogant that you now can't even tell the difference between the two of you?
The way Vincent Reeves spoke, it was as if the person standing in front of him was not Kevin, but the Herbalist Society's chairman. This made the surrounding people even more confused. What kind of background did Kevin have that even the commissioner thought so highly of him?
Commissioner Reeves, I really don't know the identity of this man. Please forgive my ignorance.
Although Clint Grayson didn't understand Vincent Reeves' anger at the moment, he wasn't a fool. To make the commissioner so angry, it could only mean that Kevin wasn't someone he could provoke.
Then why are you still standing there? Get down on your knees this instant and apologize to him.
Vincent kicked Clint Grayson's leg. To be honest, he could no longer remember the last time he had been this furious over something. Because of what the chairman had said to him the other day, Vincent Reeves wished he could personally walk alongside Kevin every day, afraid that something unexpected would happen to him whenever he was alone. This time, not only did Clint Grayson seek trouble, he even wanted to kill Kevin.
Do you really want me to kneel down before him?
Clint subconsciously thought that he had misheard him. After all, he was the dignified chief herbalist of the Herbalist Society. Putting aside the fact that Kevin was just a young man, kneeling down and apologizing to him in front of everyone was much harder than killing him. What would this mean for his reputation?
Stop wasting everyone's time. Let me make things easier for you. If you don't kneel down and apologize today, you'll no longer be the chief herbalist in the future. Moreover, you'll be banished from the Herbalist Society altogether. So unless you want to go back to your hometown and retire, I suggest you do the right thing.
Vincent's demands were serious. He clearly wasn't joking with him. Clint Grayson's face turned ugly as soon as he heard this. He then lowered his head and looked at the ground with his fists tightly clenched. There was silence everywhere. Everyone could sense the tension in the air between Clint Grayson and Vincent Reeves, both of whom were among the Herbalist Society's higher-ups. Therefore, no one dared to say anything at this moment. There's no need for him to apologize to me. Kevin crossed his arms in front of his chest and slowly broke the silence. However, it's clear to me that he has some old grudge to settle with Mr. Barnes. Vincent, as commissioner, I wonder if you can do me a favor. Why don't you let the two of them settle things once and for all through a one-on-one battle? You can treat it as compensation for what happened to me today. Larry Barnes was startled when he heard this as he, along with everyone else on the scene, looked at Kevin in disbelief. As an outsider, Kevin might not know about it, but there was no one among the Herbalist Society's older generation who had never heard of what happened during the intense battle between Clint Grayson and Larry Barnes in the past.
Are you sure?
Vincent Reeves asked with a grave expression.
Kevin, you might not be familiar with the internal rules of our organization, so let me explain it to you now. A battle between the two of them would be a huge gamble with high stakes. Given the thin line between life and death, there's no guarantee for survival.
Is that so? Kevin raised his eyebrows. He had never heard of this before. He then turned around and looked at Larry Barnes. Mr. Barnes, are you confident that you can beat this bald-headed rival of yours? When they heard Kevin's bold words, the people watching off to the side suddenly wanted to laugh out loud, but they didn't dare to do so. Behind his back, many people made fun of Clint Grayson's rapidly receding hairline. But as they struggled to hold back their laughter, they couldn't believe that this young man would be so bold as to point it out. With Clint's anger rising minute by minute, a competition between him and Larry would surely be an explosive event. Clint Grayson had attempted to force Larry Barnes to apologize for the events at the market, which led Kevin to get in the middle of their fight, challenging Clint to a battle. Before Clint could respond, Commissioner Reeves had arrived, and surprisingly demanded that Clint apologize to Kevin. As Reeves threatened Clint with removal from his role in the Herbalist Society, Kevin came up with another idea, an herbalist competition between Clint and Larry, one that Reeves feared could be deadly. Despite all the hushed whispers and giggles from the crowd about his receding hairline, Clint Grayson didn't get angry because of what Kevin said. Instead, he couldn't control his excitement and even revealed a smile. If Kevin had suggested something else, Clint Grayson might have made things difficult for him later on, but he was quite confident in his ability to defeat Larry Barnes once more. After all, the two of them had been rivals for a long time, not only in herbalism but also in many other aspects of life, from the clothes they wore to the food they ate. Back then, Clint Grayson had never felt that he was worse than Larry Barnes in all of these things. It was just that Clint always seemed to have bad luck at the worst time. That was why Clint Grayson had resorted to using despicable means at the most crucial portion of their competition, knowing that securing his victory over Larry Barnes would change his fortune.
I've waited for this opportunity for 20 years. Thank you, young man.
Larry Barnes was so thrilled that he wanted to give Kevin a big hug. Hey, don't thank me just yet. Now listen to me. I'm sure you know that I want something from you as well. If you can win in the end, this royal heart crystal herb is mine. Kevin smiled as he casually tossed the item around in his hand.
No problem. When I finally claim my revenge on that man, I can even assure you of my loyalty.
Larry promised without thinking. When Vincent Reeves saw this exchange between Kevin and Larry Barnes, there was a hint of approval in his eyes. It disappeared very quickly, before anyone could notice.
Since neither side has any objections, then let's all head over to the herbalism arena now.
Vincent Reeves turned his head and glanced at the old man in blue, Todd Geller.
Go and get someone to make arrangements for this battle. Remember to ensure fairness, otherwise the two crimes will be punished together.
Todd Geller couldn't help but shudder when he heard this. Of course, he understood exactly what Vincent Reeves had meant by this. Kevin almost had an accident in the internal trading market, and he was the person who had been assigned to accompanying him. It seemed that he was indeed incompetent for leaving Kevin alone in the first place. The Herbalism Arena was also a place that only members of the Herbalist Society could use. In order to gauge the level of the new generation's talent every year, or amidst an intense conflict with someone, the best way for members who were full of ambition to settle matters was to come to the Herbalism Arena and use their skills to compete against one another. This way, determining who was stronger or weaker would be made obvious in front of everyone. Because of this, the Herbalism Arena could be said to be one of the liveliest places in the Herbalist Society. Under Todd Geller's instructions, both Clint Grayson and Larry Barnes were placed at the center of the venue and surrounded by an audience that was full of curious spectators. In front of them were 2 bronze pill furnaces, as well as various medicinal herbs that had been prepared for them to freely make use of. Hey, have you heard? Larry Barnes is going to challenge Clint Grayson today, someone exclaimed.
Are you serious? Isn't Larry Barnes one of those stall owners on the second floor of the internal market?
The person behind him recalled. After 20 years, Larry Barnes will be facing his old rival again. I wonder who will win and lose this time, a woman wondered. Moreover, I heard that this competition was personally arranged by the commissioner himself. The stakes of this matchup must be quite valuable, don't you think?
Clint Grayson hasn't fought in a long time, but I heard that Larry Barnes suffered a crushing defeat to him back then. Still, it's been 20 years, so it's really hard to say who will win this battle.
Her and her friend nodded their heads in agreement. 20 years could change a lot for 2 herbalists, and perhaps Larry's skills were such that he could now beat Clint. Under the bustling noise from the surrounding crowd, Vincent Reeves brought Kevin to sit in a chair beside him, as they watched from a tall platform that towered over everyone else.
I really didn't expect that you would be the one to rekindle Larry Barnes' fighting spirit.
Vincent Reeves picked up a cup of coffee on the table and took a sip. Fighting spirit? What do you mean? Kevin asked curiously as he squinted his eyes and looked at the 2 old rivals who had entered the Herbalism Arena one after the other.
As an outsider, there are some things that you don't know about their history. 2 decades ago, Larry Barnes was the #1 genius of the Herbalist Society. But for some reason, he was challenged and defeated by Clint Grayson in a battle just like this one. That sparked a series of unfortunate events for him, which has led to the Larry Barnes that you are looking at now.
Vincent put down his cup of coffee and slowly explained.
All these years, we have actually been secretly observing Larry. After all, we didn't want to lose the best herbalist of his generation. It was just that he chose to keep a low profile as a stall owner since then, as if that loss had left too much of a curse on his life. It made him lose all of his fighting spirit. Soon after that, he lost everything else in his life as well, including his loved ones. Kevin was slightly shocked when he heard this. He didn't expect Larry Barnes to have such a decorated but tragic past, given that he was currently just a small stall owner. At this moment, Larry Barnes and Clint Grayson were standing in front of their respective pill furnaces in the center of the herbalism arena. I'm surprised that after so many years, you still have the heart to seek your revenge. By daring to accept my challenge, it only means that your courage is quite commendable, but also stupid at the same time. Have you forgotten how badly you lost to me the last time we competed?
Clint Grayson tidied up the medicinal herbs in his hands as he sneered and glanced disdainfully at Larry Barnes. However, Larry Barnes didn't care about anything that Clint Grayson said. Instead of checking the condition of his pill furnace and the quality of his medicinal herbs, he slowly closed his eyes to concentrate on the competition that lay ahead and how he got to this point in his life. In an instant, various scenes that had been sealed in his mind for many years quickly flashed before him. The tragic death of his wife and son, the loss of his friends, and the humiliation that Clint Grayson and his son had given him in the market for so many years. After a long time, Larry Barnes finally reopened his eyes, which had become blood red from all the tears that he had cried.
Clint Grayson, you stepped on my dignity and stole what was rightfully mine. You shouldn't have dragged my family into this and ruthlessly attacked them. Because of you, I lost everything and have endured a great deal of humiliation for the past 20 years. Larry roared fiercely as he gritted his teeth. Today, I can't wait to defeat you in the same place where it all started. This time I shall definitely defeat you and dedicate my victory to my wife and son in heaven. You seem to overestimate yourself. Back when you were at the peak of your skills, I was able to defeat you. Now that you're just a sorry old man, what do I need to be afraid of?
Clint shrugged his shoulders in mockery. With that, he decisively ignited the flame underneath his pill furnace and placed his chosen herbs inside of it. There were no rules in this pill refining battle. In fact, they weren't limited to using the medicinal herbs that were on hand if they brought their own. However, if there was an explosion during the pill refining process or if there were any other mistakes, then the loser would take full responsibility for his loss. It was not an exaggeration to say that Larry Barnes was currently fighting with his back against the wall. If he won, he would definitely return to his peak by reclaiming his status as the top herbalist of his generation. However, if he lost, there would be no longer any room for discussion on the matter. Knowing that this was his last chance to prove himself, he couldn't afford to lose to Clint Grayson again, no matter what. In the eyes of ordinary Herbalist Society members, the speed at which these two men went about their pill refinement was like that of their youthful days, and the techniques that they used were quite dazzling. Unbelievable! Larry Barnes has been silent for so many years, but his technique isn't any weaker than Mr. Grayson's. Someone exclaimed in awe.
Mr. Grayson is really too strong. No wonder he's the current chief herbalist.
Another said while showing support for Clint Grayson. What the heck? He can actually open the lid and infuse his spiritual energy into the herbs while controlling the flames at the same time. I thought that type of physical strength was only possible in books. A third person marveled at the level of talent being displayed by Larry Barnes. With the battle looking to be a close call, the surrounding spectators all shouted in excitement.
So what if you haven't lost a step? Today's winner is destined to be me.
Clint shouted and quickly took out a jade object from his pocket and threw it into his pill furnace. Is that a jade peacock stone? Looks like he wants to refine a grade 7 pill called the Bright Spirit Pill. Kevin suddenly couldn't sit still and stood up from his chair in surprise. Seeing that Clint was going to attempt such a difficult technique made Kevin worry that Larry was again going to be defeated, and that Larry's life might go further downward. As the contest between Clint and Larry began, Kevin learned from Reeves that Larry was once the top herbalist of his generation, but after being defeated by Clint, his life spiraled downward and he endured many tragedies. Larry himself was remembering these horrible events while battling Clint in the competition, but Clint surprised everyone by starting on a grade 7 pill conversion that required skills that even Kevin feared Larry doesn't have.
You're right about the stone, but it seems that he actually wants to refine a grade 8 pill called the Blooming Essence Pill.
Vincent Reeves saw through Clint Grayson's intentions with a glance. Although Clint Grayson's victory back then had been secured unfairly, the fact that he was able to become the chief herbalist of the Herbalist Society and keep his position for so many years meant that his herbalism skills were definitely formidable. Grade 7 pills were usually priceless commodities when sold outside. As soon as word would spread about a grade 7 pill's existence, interested parties would be willing to pay an exorbitant amount of money and use force against fellow competitors just to get their hands on it. However, the ability to refine grade 7 pills was not enough to solidify Clint Grayson's position as chief herbalist of the Herbalist Society and the top herbalist within his generation. Blooming Essence Pill? Is that the legendary miraculous pill that can prolong one's life for at least 20 more years? Kevin blurted out in surprise. There were clear records of the Blooming Essence Pill in the secret book, and since reading about it, Kevin had always wanted to refine 2 of the pills for his parents. However, the required medicinal ingredients were too rare. Kevin had never even seen a jade peacock stone until today. Moreover, he didn't expect Clint Grayson to have more than one of them in his hands.
I heard that the Grayson family owns a jade mine that has been passed down for generations. Now it seems like the rumors are true, and it's very likely that he gets those precious stones from there.
Vincent Reeves stroked his chin with his hand and spoke as if he was deep in thought. A jade mine? That's insane. I didn't expect the Grayson family to be quite so powerful outside of the Herbalist Society. Kevin could barely stop himself from cursing. Meanwhile, Larry Barnes wasn't surprised at all when he saw Clint Grayson's jade peacock stone. It was almost as if he had already expected this and had a counter of his own. With that, he immediately took out a black stone from his pocket that was emitting a faint light.
Is that a Black Eagle stone?
Todd Geller's eyes widened in shock as he suddenly stood up from his chair. Vincent Reeves also had a look of surprise on his face after realizing that the Black Eagle stone Larry Barnes took out was even more precious than Clint Grayson's jade peacock stone. Larry Barnes looked at the stone in his hand with a complicated expression on his face, as if he was contemplating whether he would be able to successfully refine a pill with it or not. After a long time, he took a deep breath before throwing it into his pill furnace. In an instant, his concoction formed a pillar of light that shot into the sky. All of a sudden, it looked as if it had swallowed the surrounding light. Just then, the 2 pill furnaces began to tremble violently as the spiritual energy that emitted from both collided violently in the air. In just a few seconds, the sky darkened. The flames that had been heating up their pill furnaces suddenly began to spread all over the arena due to the strong waves of spiritual energy that rippled in the air. Because of this phenomenon, the surrounding spectators had no choice but to retreat and use their own spiritual energy to protect their bodies from injury.
Activate the protective shield.
Vincent Reeves quickly gave the order. Due to the intertwining wind and fire mixing and swirling in the center of the arena, Larry Barnes's clothes and hair were starting to burn. After all, he was just an ordinary stall owner now who couldn't afford to buy himself some protective clothing. Despite this, Larry Barnes did not have the slightest intention of retreating, as he simply gritted his teeth and endured the pain. He didn't even bother to protect his own body. Instead, he focused all his spiritual energy on the pill furnace in front of him, carefully controlling the temperature of the fire so that the pill he was refining wouldn't be affected.
Larry, I advise you to give up. If you persist, you will be burned to a pile of charcoal.
Clint glanced at Larry Barnes with a mocking smile. Unlike Larry, Clint Grayson was wearing a protective long suit that he had previously acquired from the internal market in exchange for 2 grade 5 pills. This allowed him to easily resist extreme conditions during the pill refinement process. At this rate, Clint even felt that he might not need to wait for his pill refinement to finish. With Larry Barnes' own pill refinement situation not looking good, he might be burned to death by the fire soon. Clint was going to be happy to win no matter how that happened, and he could not care less if that meant that Larry died during the contest. Back in Chicago, Lily was sitting in her hospital bed and had just put down the document in her hand after she finished reading it. "Officer Emmett, instead of wasting time here in the hospital, you might as well leave and resume your investigation. As the victim of this attack, if you can't give me a reasonable answer on who was behind this, I don't think Dalton Steele will rest until this matter has been resolved," Lily told her calmly while leaning on the hospital bed. From the moment she was let inside Lily's hospital room until now, Officer Emmett had only talked about trivial matters and never mentioned anything about the case. As such, Lily really didn't want to waste any more time with her. Because of this, she figured that she could use Dalton Steele to pressure Officer Emmett into leaving. "As part of our duty, we will naturally resolve that matter and capture the suspect when the time comes. But before anything else, Mrs. Williams, I think there are a few things that need to be explained to you." Officer Emmett spoke slowly. "First of all, although you are a student of the Healing Arts School, your power base is too low to be a threat to anyone. To put it bluntly, given that there are some things that are too dangerous for you, it's better for you to stay away from conflict, especially if you can't defend yourself. Second, no matter how strong he is, don't think that you can trust Dalton Steele to protect and support you in the same way that Kevin can. You have to understand that the Williams Company is a legitimate company, while the Steele family acquired its power through underground activities. I hope you can distinguish black from white." Officer Emmett's eyes slightly narrowed as she stared coldly at Lily. Her tone carried a strong warning. Despite the tone of this exchange between the two of them, Officer Emmett realized today that she had really underestimated Lily in the past. Thus, from one woman to another, she simply wanted to give her some advice. No matter how dangerous the matter is, I will not be afraid. Kevin is my husband. As his wife, I might not be able to help him solve all his problems, but I have to do my best to protect what he's built here in Chicago." How could Lily not understand what Officer Emmett was trying to express? As she began to take charge of the Williams Company, the level of things that she had come into contact with was much higher than anything she had handled before. In fact, there were many things that she hadn't known and therefore had to learn about on the fly. Even if she didn't go out of her way to find out about something, there would still be people who would tell her. So, regarding what had happened between Kevin and Officer Emmett, Lily knew that she was involved in his dispute with the Williams family and the union. "If that's the case, then I've already said what I needed to say. Mrs. Williams, please be more careful from now on. If anything happens to you again, please don't hesitate to contact us as soon as possible." Officer Emmett got up as if she seemed to have thought of something new. "Oh, right. There is something else that I think you should know about. We have already found out the background of the people who attacked you, and they're all from Washington, D.C. As for why, you can ask your husband." When she heard this, Lily's facial expression didn't change much, but her heart trembled deep down. After Officer Emmett left, Dalton Steele quickly walked in.
Lily, what did that woman say to you? Should I send someone to give her a warning?
Forget it, Dalton. She didn't say much, actually. She only told me that the people who attacked me were all vicious people, and they will follow up on the investigation. Lily smiled faintly.
Is that so?
Dalton scratched the back of his head. In his estimation, Officer Emmett was not a woman who was so easy to talk to. Don't worry, Dalton. Although Lily said so, there was still a strange look in her eyes that no one but she could have read. It was absolutely impossible for Lily not to have any resentment in her heart. It was just that the situation didn't allow her to vent her frustrations to anyone at the moment. Lily knew that only Kevin could understand at this point, and yet she didn't know when she and her husband would be together again. Lily was annoyed that Officer Emmett questioned her about matters other than the investigation, and tried to get her to leave by mentioning Dalton Steele. Instead of leaving, Emmett gave Lily indirect warnings about Dalton, and also told her that Lily's attackers most likely were connected to Kevin's activities in Washington. Lily was bothered by this, but tried to remain calm and collected so as not to look weak and give the impression that she wasn't a strong wife and leader of her husband's companies. Back in the Murphy family's mansion in Washington, Donald Murphy and Herman Thompson were eyeing each other as they sat in comfortable chairs. George Eubanks was leaning back in a chair across from them, leisurely drinking the coffee in his cup. After Kevin visited the Orion Group the other day, the fight between him and the Kessler family had officially commenced. As the market leader in the country's energy industry, the ability and resources that the Orion Group possessed were vast. With strength that could topple mountains, it quickly went after the Kessler family and tried to squeeze the Kessler Corporation out of the picture. However, Raymond Kessler was no ordinary person. Throughout the years, the old man had amassed a vast number of resources and avenues for his business endeavors. And under his leadership, the Kessler family was able to resist the Orion Group while also launching more than one counterattack over the years. Although Kevin had been preoccupied with other matters in Herbalist City these past few days, the conflict that he started between the two giants had already cost tens of millions of dollars worth of damages to both sides. Because of this, it didn't take long for either side to stir up the entire industry and country as a way of getting the upper hand on the other. Though their battle had been quite intense so far, neither of the two companies had an overwhelming advantage. While the status of the Orion Group in the business world was unquestionable, the Kessler family had government connections that were only a phone call away during times like these. As such, the other companies in the same industry or related ones were smart enough not to choose a side for the time being. They all wanted to see how the situation would play out first. Similarly, the reason why Donald Murphy and the other two old men had gathered together today was to discuss their stance on this situation and which side they would support.
It seems like Raymond Kessler is really determined to take Kevin's life this time.
Donald Murphy gently massaged his forehead. In the face of this situation, he was almost caught in a dilemma. Although the Murphy family's standpoint was very clear in that Donald Murphy wanted to support Kevin's rise in D.C., at the same time he also considered Raymond Kessler to be an old friend. In fact, he and Herman Thompson even tried to caution him against starting a conflict with Kevin.
Why didn't you tell me that Kevin had chosen to go up against the Kessler family?
George Eubanks asked with an indifferent tone as he sipped some coffee.
Let me put it this way. No matter how you look at things, the Kessler family was the one in the wrong in this conflict of theirs. It's not Kevin's fault that they chose to pick a fight with him. In any case, regardless of what choice you two make, the Thompson family will definitely support Kevin.
Herman Thompson expressed his sentiments in a serious manner. The corners of Donald Murphy and George Eubanks' mouth slightly curved up when they heard this. They couldn't help but think to themselves,
Of course, you're going to choose Kevin over Raymond Kessler. The Thompson family has been firmly behind Kevin since he saved Herman's life back in St. Louis. Now that he's made his way to D.C., how can Herman just give up on him halfway?
Of course, these words could only be said in their hearts. Neither Donald Murphy nor George Eubanks would dare to say this out loud. Instead, Donald Murphy suddenly turned his head to look at George Eubanks.
"What do you think?" he asked.
I can't deny the fact that Kevin saved my life, and he was the one who pulled my family out of the abyss. There's no chance of me betraying him after that. So even though Raymond is an old friend, I will treat my support for Kevin as my way of returning the favor to him."
George Eubanks thought for a moment and continued.
"Donald, I won't mind if you choose not to get involved in this mess. With Herman and me stepping in, that would already put Raymond in a very difficult situation. Besides, as far as I know, the Murphy family and Kevin have never had much of a relationship, so it doesn't matter if you sit this one out and stay on the sidelines. Whether it's for the sake of protecting your own safety or preserving an old friendship, there's a good reason for you not to show your outright support for one side over the other."
George Eubanks' words were so level-headed and reasonable that even Herman Thompson couldn't find any fault in them. At the moment, Donald Murphy was deeply conflicted. Although he really wanted to help Kevin raise his status in D.C., he also didn't want to do anything that would make things difficult for Raymond Kessler. But could he really stay in the middle without drawing the ire of either side? Moreover, as much as there were risks involved, wouldn't he also lose out on the potential benefits that were given to loyal supporters? Since Kevin could seemingly hide behind others with ease, as in the case of using the Orion Group to fight on his behalf against the Kessler Corporation, Donald Murphy couldn't tell how many other bargaining chips he had at his disposal. In contrast, the friendship between the Murphy family and the Kessler family had remained intact for decades, which was impossible for him to ignore just because of a momentary conflict with Kevin. However, as everyone in the business world knew, there was no such thing as an eternal friend or enemy. Relationships between people could change at any time depending on the current benefits and purposes that it would serve. Since Kevin's arrival in Washington, D.C., both the Morris family and the Orion Group had made it clear that they were on the same side as him, and Donald Murphy knew very well that the combined influence of these two forces was not to be underestimated. In addition, Kevin had also won the preliminary round of the Herbalist Society's competition. Although the rest of the contest was still ahead of him, the value of that first success was unimaginable. From these aspects alone, anyone could tell that Kevin was obviously a rare talent, but how far could he go? In the capital, the struggle for power was much like sailing against the current. If he failed to advance, he would be swept away and forced to retreat. Because no one could guarantee that there wouldn't be any unexpected changes, Kevin could only be regarded as a high-quality stock in a highly volatile market. From a safe investment, it all depended on whether Donald Murphy was willing to risk the lives of everyone in the Murphy family in hopes of reaping endless benefits in the future. Faced with an uncomfortable decision, Donald Murphy was somewhat envious of and even awed by Herman Thompson. After all, the Thompson family and Kevin had already stood together in St. Louis. Although the two of them weren't completely inseparable, they could be said to be virtually joined at the hip. Having known Kevin the longest out of their families, they had been through enough experiences together to trust that they had each other's backs no matter what. If Kevin succeeded and became famous in the future, the Thompson family would definitely be able to regain a foothold in Washington. Adding the foundation they had already built up in the Midwest, they would definitely reach the peak of both territories. At the same time, even if Kevin ended up failing in D.C., the Thompson family wouldn't suffer much of a loss. Herman Thompson could always go back to St. Louis, where his family's roots were firmly in place since moving there decades ago. However, it was impossible for these other prestigious families from D.C. to escape to the Midwest, knowing that they would be throwing away all their advantages and would need to start over. In contrast, the Midwest, especially St. Louis, was a territory where the Thompson family was deeply feared and respected. Therefore, it could be said that Herman Thompson was simply attempting a business deal that cost him nothing. As for the Eubanks family, Kevin had previously saved George Eubanks' life. That was why George was now so willing to help Kevin with everything he had. However, whether or not he had any other thoughts or reservations about the matter was unknown.
George, what do you mean by this? While you and Herman come forward to support Kevin, do you want me to simply hide behind you guys like a turtle?
Donald's eyes widened and he asked in an extremely dissatisfied manner.
Why don't you recognize a good person's heart? I didn't say it as a slight to your abilities, but I'm just wondering whether your ties with Kevin are strong enough for you to willingly support him. In the eyes of others, your family seems to have a bad relationship with him, especially after he humiliated your grandson. I'm trying to give you a way out, don't you understand?
George's violent temper immediately rose as he replied fearlessly.
How dare you bring that up and use it against me? Didn't your own grandson get beaten up by Kevin as well? Stop making assumptions on my behalf. I'm more than capable of speaking for myself on this matter.
Donald was so angry that he almost cursed at him.
Then are you saying that you're willing to support Kevin with us?
George raised an eyebrow at him and asked.
Why can't I do something that you old men do? I may not have fought with Raymond Kessler in a very long time, but I don't think you can do so either without my support. Otherwise, you guys might not be able to last 5 minutes against him.
Donald proudly raised his chin. What he said was right. Although the four families were known for helping each other out of difficult situations when they came up, and though there seemed to be no distinction between them in the eyes of many outsiders, this wasn't the case at all in reality. Being the closest one to Raymond Kessler, Donald Murphy was well aware of how the Kessler family had developed the fastest among the four of them in recent years. And that was something that Donald Murphy had to see halted, even if it meant backing Kevin in what was sure to be a long and difficult struggle. With the war between the Orion Group and the Kessler Corporation having officially begun and shaking the entire country, both Herman Thompson and George Eubanks quickly declared their support for Kevin. However, Donald Murphy was deeply conflicted about doing the same due to his close friendship with Raymond Kessler. When George reassured him that he and Herman could take charge of the matter, Donald refused to take a back seat to them. It was just that there were some things that the Murphy and Eubanks family weren't willing to do. That was why they had fallen behind the Kessler family's development. With that, a complicated expression suddenly flashed across Herman Thompson's eyes.
Since everyone has made up their mind, we should act as soon as possible. Although the Orion Group has deep pockets, the amount of money that they have lost has reached an astronomical figure. If this conflict drags on for much longer, we don't want Kevin to blame us for not properly handling things in his absence.
Donald Murphy frowned when he heard that, while George Eubanks took out his phone. In the Orion Group's office, Terry Watford was flipping through the documents in his hands with a serious look on his face. Just then, his assistant, Aaron Harper, quickly walked in from the outside and was carrying even more papers with him. His expression wasn't very pleased either.
President Watford, this is the latest market report.
Just put it on the table. I will read it later, Terry Watford instructed without looking up. Aaron bit his lip lightly as he gathered the courage to speak up.
Sir, I think I have to say something about this matter. Why did we start a war with the Kessler Corporation? Was it only because of Mr. Williams?
The war between the Orion Group and the Kessler Corporation happened very suddenly. When Terry Watford first gave the order, it shocked everyone in the company. No one knew what it was for, and Terry Watford didn't explain his reasons to anyone. However, Aaron could roughly guess one thing, knowing that this all started right after Kevin came to visit the company. Aaron, you're a smart person, which is why I hired you as my assistant. That being said, you should know your position clearly. There are some things that are highly confidential in the company, and it's better for you not to know what you shouldn't know. Terry sternly responded, as if to warn him to stop meddling and back off. But sir, I'm also a part of the company. I feel that I have the right to know. Ever since the war with the Kessler Corporation started, the company has already lost tens of millions of dollars. In addition, the government has also been making things difficult for us as of late. This has caused everyone in the company to be anxious, and many people are questioning your decision. Aaron was so nervous that he started to speak his mind freely without thinking about his choice of words. How dare you talk to me like that? Are you telling me how to do my job? Terry furiously threw the document in his hands onto the table. Tell those who question my leadership to get out if they no longer want to be employed by this company. That includes you. Aaron was shocked by this. He had never seen Terry Watford so angry before. Just then, a senior officer of the Orion Group ran inside with a huge smile on his face. President Watford, this news should put you in a good mood. We just received word that those people that the government sent to harass us have suddenly left, and those helping the Kessler family have also withdrawn. Is that really the case? Terry stood up from his chair happily. At the same time, Aaron was in disbelief. After all, if those who dared to threaten the Orion Group were all influential and powerful government figures, he could only imagine how terrifying the forces that could make them withdraw so quickly were. It's absolutely true, sir. In fact, those people who came by our office to look for trouble were also dejected after receiving the call from their superior. The man reported with extreme excitement. While there were only a few companies that could scare the Orion Group in terms of resources alone, the Kessler family had too many government officials behind them, which held back Terry Watford's plans every step of the way. Great! Immediately pass down my order to every employee in the company. We must take down the Kessler Corporation in the shortest amount of time possible. Terry immediately wanted to strike before the Kessler family had the chance to regroup. Although no one had been sent to investigate what happened, Terry Watford could roughly guess that it was Kevin who had secretly made a move. The other day, Kevin told him that there would be people who would resolve the matters in the government for him. However, these past few days, the Orion Group had been warned and suppressed by all kinds of people. When no one came to help, Terry Watford was beginning to think that Kevin had lied to him all along. Just as he had begun to lose hope, he didn't expect that help would arrive in such a timely manner. Furthermore, it had come with a menacing aura, directly ending the progress of the Kessler family. From this, it could be seen how vast and powerful the resources in Kevin's hands were. Terry Watford had been working hard in Washington, D.C. for so many years. While he had managed to establish a lot of connections in that time, it still wasn't enough that he could instantly undermine the position of the Kessler family. Meanwhile, Kevin had managed to surpass his influence and get the job done within days of his arrival in D.C. Talk about efficiency! However, the truth was that Kevin had no idea about all these developments. Even he wouldn't have expected Herman Thompson and the others to act so swiftly. Back in the herbalism arena, both Clint Grayson and Larry Barnes had just reached the most critical moment of refining their respective pills. At this moment, the two pill furnaces emitted a light green color, and a rich pill fragrance filled the surrounding air. When no one was looking, Clint Grayson glanced briefly at Larry Barnes's pill furnace. A sinister smile then appeared on his face as a tiny black object shot out from the index and middle fingers of his right hand. As soon as it entered Larry Barnes's pill furnace, it immediately began to tremble violently. What's going on? The time to extract the essence and form the pill has already passed. There's no reason for Mr. Barnes's pill furnace to explode. Kevin frowned and scratched his head in a puzzled manner. Normally, there were 3 steps to refining pills: purification, condensation, and the final completion of the pill. Any herbalist would know that a pill furnace explosion usually happened only during the first 2 steps. Furthermore, both Larry Barnes and Clint Grayson were far from being ordinary herbalists. In their hands, an explosion should never even occur. Vincent Reeves's brows knitted together tightly. He wasn't worried about the impact of Larry's pill furnace exploding. With a single move, he would definitely be able to ensure the safety of everyone present. However, some other detail caught his attention. In fact, the higher-ups of the Herbalist Society who were watching the show on the high platform were all frowning right now for the very same reason. The current scene was very similar to the battle between Larry Barnes and Clint Grayson 20 years ago, which was also at the center of this arena. Just as their pills were about to take shape, a pill furnace explosion occurred. Seeing this about to happen under almost the same circumstances 2 decades later couldn't just be a coincidence.
It seems like there are some things that can never be avoided.
Vincent Reeves remarked thoughtfully, but as commissioner, he obviously didn't have any way to prevent history from repeating itself. The herbalism arena had the power to change the course of one's future. Not only did competitors bet their wealth, but they were also willing to gamble with their own lives. As such, those who won would be able to make a name for themselves, while those who lost would be relegated to a measly existence, if not banished from the Herbalist Society altogether. Regardless of the tactics they used, people would only remember the winner in the end. Meanwhile, whether it was done shamelessly out in the open or in hushed voices, the loser was destined to become the laughingstock of all of the other members. It was definitely a fate worse than simply being forgotten. What exactly is going on? Kevin frowned slightly. He kept looking around the center of the arena with a serious expression as if he was looking for the root cause of the problem. At the same time, he also noticed the higher-ups of the Herbalist Society surrounding him. Apart from those who had already expressed their support for Clint Grayson, there were also others who had made their stance clear without saying anything. Based on the look of pity on their faces, it was clear who they were rooting for. Some of them even shook their heads slightly. In the center of the arena, Larry Barnes' expression was extremely troubled. Boundless spiritual energy surged out of his body like tidal waves as he tried his best to keep his pill furnace from going out of control.
Larry, you really don't have a good memory, do you? Did you actually just challenge me in order to remember what your loss felt like back then?
A proud smile appeared on Clint Grayson's face.
Anyway, there's no longer any need for you to keep going in today's competition. The final victor can only be me.
I will never admit defeat until the last moment. Larry Barnes gritted his teeth and defiantly brushed off his mockery. He then released even more spiritual energy from his body into the pill furnace.
Larry, it's useless to resist the inevitable. Besides, you were supposed to be a dead man 20 years ago. If it wasn't for the commissioner repeatedly asking me not to kill you, do you think you would still be alive today?
Clint sneered at him loudly.
If only you had contented yourself with being a lowly stall owner, I wouldn't have bothered you for the rest of your life. But by being so bold to challenge me again, it seems that you no longer value the second chance at life that I've given you. So you can't blame me for what's about to happen. Once I'm declared the official winner, I won't afford you any mercy this time around.
This was the reality. No matter what angle one viewed it from, Clint Grayson had already gained the upper hand, and victory was already within his grasp. According to the rules of the pill battle, as long as he could stall for time and wait for Larry Barnes' pill furnace to explode, Clint Grayson would no longer need to finish refining his own pill. Even if he had been refining an inferior pill all this time, no one would ever know, and he would still be able to claim the final victory by default. Upon doing so, he was definitely planning to take Larry Barnes' life. After begrudgingly letting him live the first time, he wasn't going to let go of this opportunity again no matter what. As Clint Grayson thought about this, he seemed to have seen a vision of Larry Barnes lying helplessly on the ground, begging him not to kill him. In order to fully realize this, he needed this victory badly. Aside from finishing off an old rival, winning would secure his position in the Herbalist Society. He wanted to let those members who were still dissatisfied with him open their eyes wide and take a good look at his talent, proving that he deserved to keep the title of Chief Herbalist after sitting in this position for so long. As time passed by, Larry Barnes' face was covered with sweat. After a crack appeared in his furnace, He had to use his spiritual energy to cover the entire pill furnace. He didn't want the high temperature to leak out and cause an explosion. At the same time, he had to divert some of his attention to control the flames at the bottom of the furnace. As memories of their previous battle flashed before his eyes, Larry Barnes was determined not to suffer the same fate again. However, compared to Clint Grayson, the amount of spiritual energy he had spent in trying to prevent his pill furnace from exploding far exceeded his opponent's. In fact, it was already to the extent that he was starting to feel somewhat powerless, and he didn't know how much longer he could hold on. Suddenly, Larry Barnes's pill furnace began to tremble violently. Since everyone present was an expert in herbalism, they all knew very well what this meant. Many of the Herbalist Society's higher-ups on the high platform sighed and shook their heads. Obviously, they had already seen the writing on the wall. Larry Barnes couldn't hold on any longer, and the final result was all but certain at this point. Kevin took a deep breath. Although he knew that a man of Larry Barnes's talent wouldn't make such a mistake, and that there must have been some other factors involved, he couldn't provide him with any help at the moment. After all, this was a battle between Larry Barnes and Clint Grayson, and according to the rules, no one was allowed to interfere no matter what. A few seconds later, several cracks quickly formed and spread across the surface of Larry Barnes's pill furnace. When the entire furnace finally exploded, a powerful blaze shot out into the sky and rippled across the surrounding arena.
Looks like you've lost yet again, Larry.
Clint looked up at the sky and laughed like a madman. He then slapped his own pill furnace with both hands, causing the lid to fly off. Clint's own furnace had barely outlasted Larry's, but that was all he needed for a victory in the competition over his bitter rival. In the pill refining competition between Clint Grayson and Larry Barnes, the latter's pill furnace developed a crack that he tried desperately to work through. Using all of his energy to keep the furnace from exploding, tiny cracks finally broke out across the entire exterior of the furnace, and it exploded violently. Clint Grayson excitedly declared his victory as he slapped the lid of his own furnace, causing it to fly off. A strong pill aroma spread out in all directions. "I didn't expect that he would actually successfully refine a Tier 8 medicinal pill." Vincent Reeves's eyes narrowed slightly, and a thoughtful expression appeared in the depths of his eyes. His slightly furrowed brows proved that he was experiencing complicated feelings in his heart.
Larry Barnes exploded his furnace, and my medicinal pill has already been defined. Shouldn't you announce the winner now?
Clint Grayson asked loudly with his head held high. Despite seeing his arrogant look, no one on the scene was in a position to refute him. The world of the herbalists was this kind of cruel reality. Everything was based on one's own strength, and medicinal pills were absolutely the best proof of this. The vast majority of herbalists, many of them were unable to refine pills that surpassed the 7th grade in their entire lifetime. Many people did not even know that Tier 7 medicinal pills were a dividing line. Only by crossing this line would one be able to truly become a top-tier herbalist. If someone crossed that dividing line, it made it far more likely that they would be able to continue to break through to even higher-tier medicinal pills. The reason why Kevin was noticed by the large and powerful Herbalist Society was all because of the medicinal pills that he had refined in the past. Almost none of them were lower than Tier 6, especially his power pill, which had not appeared for many years. Therefore, in the eyes of the Herbalist Society, it was very likely that Kevin would be able to refine a Tier 8 or even Tier 9 medicinal pill someday. And what was even more notable was that he had this skill and potential at such a young age. Who could tell what the limits of his future were? That was why he had attracted the attention of all the major powers. If he couldn't be recruited for their own use, there was no telling how terrifying a threat he could become.
A Tier 8 medicinal pill? I'm not so sure about that.
The old man blinked his eyes twice and considered the condition of Clint Grayson's pill.
Even if it's a notch below, a 7th grade pill is clearly enough for him to win the competition at this moment.
the old man in blue said, but he didn't reveal a trace of happiness. His eyes were fixed on Larry Barnes, just as everyone else was looking at Clint Grayson.
I didn't expect that there would be a person stupid enough to fail twice in the same place. What a waste of the commissioner's effort on him.
In front of them, Larry Barnes suddenly let out a cold snort.
You have the nerve to take out such a mediocre pill? It seems like not only has your character not improved over the years, but even your skill in herbalism has regressed by quite a bit.
Hearing this, everyone turned their eyes to Clint Grayson. Would he let a remark like this go without a fight? Vincent Reeves was stunned at first, but then his face revealed a smile. He gently waved his right hand and released a wave of spiritual energy, which blew away all of the dust in the venue. At that moment, everyone saw Larry Barnes's appearance clearly. His clothes were all tattered, and his face was covered with black dust. Only his eyes and white teeth were unscathed, and there were some wounds on his body that came when fragments from the exploding furnace flew through the air. However, no one in the audience teased him because of his appearance at this moment, because Larry Barnes was holding a pill in his hand that gave off a black trail of smoke. On the high platform, Kevin's and Vincent Reeves's eyes were completely focused on the pill. Even from such a distance, they could catch the rich fragrance of the newly created pill. The black halo emitted by the pill itself was crushing the radiance of the second pill in Clint Grayson's hand. Many of the herbalists present, as long as they had discerning eyes, could see that Larry Barnes had successfully refined the medicinal pill in his hand.
No, it's impossible. You already exploded the furnace. How could you still manage to refine the pill?
Clint Grayson's face was filled with disbelief. He choked on his own words and took a few steps back.
Nothing is impossible. Clint Grayson, your knowledge is too shallow.
Larry Barnes coughed violently for a while after saying this. Although the pill could be refined perfectly, it didn't mean that Larry Barnes wasn't affected by the explosion. Fresh blood trickled down from the corner of his mouth as he continued to cough.
Nonsense! How could a pill like that be refined when the furnace exploded?
Clint Grayson, who was fiercely refuting what was right in front of his eyes, suddenly stopped. His face revealed a look of sudden anger.
I understand now. You must have taken advantage of the time when the dust was thick. You took that opportunity to steal the pill. Larry Barnes, I've seen through your trick. I didn't expect that after so many years you would be so shameless in your effort to defeat me. You really are pathetic.
These words immediately attracted the approval of many people around. Those who had yet to understand what was going on suddenly seemed to have grasped the greatest secret in the world as they roared with righteous indignation.
So that's how it is. It's not surprising that he would cheat, one of them said.
I never thought that he would do such a despicable thing, though, another person said. All kinds of voices were murmuring about Larry Barnes while others shouted at him as if they knew he was a great disgrace to the Herbalist Society. On the high platform, Kevin furrowed his brows and looked down. He had experienced so many similar things in Chicago that this now made him empathize with Larry Barnes. As commissioner, Vincent Reeves was sitting firmly in his chair above the fray and did not have any effect on the voices below. The two old men in blue and white knitted their brows slightly and revealed displeased expressions. However, due to their identity and the nature of the arena, neither of them could stand up and say anything. In the middle of the arena, Larry Barnes listened to the accusations being hurled at him. His face, which had been covered in dust due to the explosion of the furnace, still visibly and quickly turned red. Even though he was now an old man, he still had his dignity. If he was really the kind of despicable person who would go to such lengths, then he would definitely not have lost to Clint Grayson in the first place.
What a load of nonsense. This pill was just refined by me. What right do you have to say that I cheated? Where's your proof?
Larry Barnes shouted at the top of his lungs.
Larry Barnes, Do you still want to try to deny it? It's obvious that you took advantage of the thick dust to avoid everyone's attention and steal the pill. If you had the ability to produce a pill after the furnace exploded, would you have lost to me back then?
Clint Grayson smiled complacently and walked slowly towards Larry Barnes. He whispered in his ear,
Do you see it? The looks on everyone's faces? Do you hear what they're saying about you? This is what people think. Don't think that you can beat me just because Kevin is meddling in other people's business. You're still just a pathetic loser.
You...
Larry Barnes started to say as his chest rose and fell violently. His heart was filled with decades of emotion that made it ready to explode like his furnace had just done. He had endured humiliation for 20 years in order to wait until today for such an opportunity.
No, I can't accept it. I don't care what you say. This pill is something that I've just refined, fair and square. Commissioner, I request that this medicinal pill be tested on the spot.
Larry Barnes declared loudly, intent on proving his innocence.
Commissioner, please don't believe a single word out of his mouth. Larry Barnes knows that he is lost. Again. That was why he stole the pill. We should use this as a warning to others to play by the rules. This way, we can uphold the righteousness of the Herbalist Society,
Clint Grayson said with his head held high. Kevin looked back at Vincent Reeves with a serious expression. Although he was concerned about the outcome of the competition, what he hated most was that Clint Grayson was clearly a treacherous person who had gotten what he wanted. Vincent Reeves used his finger to lightly tap his forehead a few times and revealed a meaningful smile on his face.
Since both sides dispute the outcome of the competition, neither of them are allowed to leave the position where they are currently standing.
Vincent Reeves lightly snapped his fingers and turned to Kevin and the men in white and blue.
The three of you go and test the pills that the two of them have refined, he said.
Hearing this, the smile on Clint Grayson's face instantly froze, especially when he heard Kevin's name. His expression quickly turned ugly. The others were also puzzled. They knew the men in white and blue. Both of them were distinguished members of the Herbalist Society. They had been by the commissioner's side for years. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that they could even be confused for Vincent Reeves's shadow from time to time. However, they didn't know much about Kevin.
Who is this person? Why have I never heard of him before?
Someone muttered.
He looks so young. How capable can he be to test these pills at such a young age?
Someone else said. Those who did not understand Kevin's identity all had different opinions. It was as if they wanted to dissect him and use a magnifying glass to slowly look at his body. However, Vincent Reeves was thinking the exact opposite of what the audience thought. Since Kevin wanted to interfere in the matter between Larry Barnes and Clint Grayson, why should he not take advantage of the situation and grant him a favor? It could also help to resolve the festering conflicts that had accumulated between Kevin and Clint. Kevin and the other two quickly walked over to collect the 2 medicinal pills.
Although I don't know why the commissioner thinks so highly of you, since you are now taking on the role of judge, I hope you can be fair and just,
Clint Grayson said with a serious expression as Kevin approached him. Kevin knew that Clint's words weren't as friendly as they sounded. They were more like a threat. Clint's call to be declared the winner after Larry's furnace exploded was overturned when Larry revealed he did create a pill, though Clint claimed that Larry cheated. Vincent Reeves ordered the old men in white and blue as well as Kevin to be the final judges. Many in the audience were surprised that Kevin, a stranger to them, was now a judge, while Clint worried that Kevin would make sure that Larry won the contest over Clint. Clint Grayson wanted to use his standing in the herbalism community to pressure Kevin. This was the territory of the Herbalist Society. As a higher-up within the organization,
Clint Grayson had a huge advantage, and there were a few things he could not do here in Herbalist City. Larry Burns looked at Kevin with eyes that were sore from the heat of the furnace explosion. Although he didn't know why this young man might help him, he knew that today might be his last chance. He knew that he had to win this competition, but he didn't have much confidence in the outcome. The gap in status and reputation between him and Clint Grayson was too wide. Anyone with a brain would understand the benefits of helping one of them at the expense of the other. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the two pills were carefully checked by the three newly appointed judges. After that, the old man in white brought the pills back to the high platform and whispered something into Vincent Reeves's ear. Not long after that, Vincent Reeves held the pills in his hands and slowly walked to the edge of the high platform, and then said loudly,
"After checking, it is clear that Larry Barnes's pill was indeed refined fairly."
Hearing that, the scene immediately broke out in gasps and excited voices. Clint Grayson painfully closed his eyes. He already knew what fate was waiting for him. Reality could sometimes be cruel. Everyone knew that Clint had skills, but his ambition and confidence got in the way of the work he had to do to perfect his craft. And now he was nearly regretting the way he had gone into the competition assuming he would win. Clint Grayson took a deep breath. At this moment, he seemed to have seen a vision of himself lying on the ground. Larry Barnes, who was standing next to him, became so excited that his whole body began to tremble. The things that he had been thinking about for 20 years were finally going to happen today. As Vincent Reeves's words fell, the surrounding people were clearly in shock. They never thought that there would be such an outcome. They thought that Clint Grayson had surely already secured his victory. Of course, despite some people who were in a daze, there were also some people who had opposite expressions on their faces. Some of them were sad, some of them were relieved, and some of them even had smiles on their faces. It was as if what had happened in front of them was some kind of justice for the oppressed. Kevin had already sat back in his chair, using his hand to support his chin. His eyes were slightly narrowed, and it was impossible to know what he was thinking.
"The outcome has been decided,"
Vincent Reeves said lightly.
No, it can't be. Commissioner, I refuse to accept it. The pills need to be retested,"
Clint Grayson said. He still hadn't given up. In his heart, he was still trying to find a way to turn the situation around.
"The result is clear. What else is there to be convinced of?"
Vincent Reeves asked with a slight frown.
"It can't be. Larry Barnes must have cheated. Kevin must have done something to help him win the competition. He must have done something to help him when he was checking the pills,"
Clint Grayson shouted loudly.
"How can I admit defeat when the two of them conspired to cheat me?"
His words immediately woke everyone up. "Is what he's saying true?" someone said.
"How could he do something so despicable?"
another onlooker commented. Hearing the indignant words of the people around him, Clint Grayson couldn't help but reveal an evil smile on his face. He wasn't about to admit defeat if he could get the crown on his side and make them believe that he had been wronged. But what he did not notice was that Vincent Reeves's face was quickly turning gloomy.
"Silence!"
Reeves suddenly said loudly as he waved his right hand. Immediately, all of the voices in the audience fell silent.
"Clint Grayson has already lost, yet he still refuses to admit it. Do you still want to question my decision?"
Vincent Reeves's expression was serious, and his tone was cold. Hearing this, Clint Grayson's expression immediately changed. His eyes widened, and he hurriedly tried to walk back his accusation.
"Wait a minute. I would never dare to question your decision,"
Clint Grayson said in a weak voice that showed a rare bit of fear.
"You should know better than anyone that Larry Barnes won this time because of his hard work and commitment. So what if his method was a bit unorthodox? Do you still have any objections?"
Vincent Reeves asked loudly. Given Reeves's identity, he did not need to explain the meaning behind his words to anyone. Any smart person could understand exactly what he meant. When a person stood in a certain position, he didn't need to think about all aspects of a decision. For a moment, even Clint Grayson did not dare to utter a single word. He just gritted his teeth and kept silent. Although his position in the Herbalist Society was not by any means low, if he dared to go against Vincent Reeves, he knew that things could only end poorly. It was clear to anyone that the two of them were not even close to being on the same level.
The conclusion of today's matter has been decided. If I hear any discussion regarding today's matter in the future, that individual will be expelled from the Herbalist Society,
Vincent Reeves said forcefully. The people gathered around were not fools. Vincent Reeves's speech had a clear meaning. He wanted to stand firmly against the negative public opinion of Larry Barnes. Who would dare to question his decision?
Commissioner, perhaps this matter should be set aside for the time being.
A voice suddenly sounded from the high platform, and it took many by surprise that anyone would question Reeves's decision. Immediately after the person spoke up, a few higher-ups of the Herbalist Society who were sitting next to the two old men in blue and white stood up quickly in unison, as if they had come to some sort of an agreement. They walked up right behind Vincent Reeves. One of the old men looked down at Clint Grayson. His expression was especially serious, and his eyes were filled with complicated emotions.
Commissioner, it's just a pill refining competition. The bet that was made was really nothing more than the result of tensions running high based on reputation. We don't have to take it quite so literally.
Another higher-up stepped forward and added,
Commissioner, he's right. After all, Clint Grayson is an extremely valuable member of the Herbalist Society. It simply wouldn't make sense. Besides, who does Larry Barnes think he is? The first man interrupted. I think it's safe to say that even though the pill has been determined to be genuine, there are still many unknown factors at play here.
Although these two were the only ones who spoke, the rest of the higher-ups beside them clearly had the same intention. It was obvious that they wanted to help Clint Grayson. The two men in blue and white frowned at the same time. How could they not know about the position of these men? All of them were clearly allies of Clint Grayson's, and they were also higher-ups of the Herbalist Society who could be considered to be very important people within the organization. Vincent Reeves placed his hands behind his back and stared at the two men. He didn't even turn his head. Fortunately, no one could see his facial expression clearly. Otherwise, they would definitely feel a chill run down their spines. Clint Grayson just stood silently with his head deeply buried in his chest. Larry Barnes slightly raised his head and looked at the tall platform. He did not know what was going to happen next. The onlookers who had come to watch the show did not dare to say another word, but now it was clear that another group of people had stood up. Because they were too far away, they could not hear what they were saying to the commissioner. All of them stared blankly at the tall platform, waiting for things to develop further.
Is that how you all feel?
Vincent Reeves finally opened his mouth and replied with a question.
Yes, Commissioner. We ask you to put this matter on hold. At most, we can just give Larry Barnes some kind of compensation,
the man said casually. At the same time, he didn't forget to glance at Kevin, who was sitting beside him. They had a rough understanding of the situation. After all, the reason why today's incident happened in the first place was because of this young man meddling in other people's business. But so what if Larry Barnes won in terms of refining medicinal pills? After all, this was the Herbalist Society, not a place where outsiders could stir up trouble. In Herbalist City, the commissioner was not the only one who held any power. Many factions had different opinions that would be heard and given weight in the decision. Therefore, they decided to stand up and collectively pressure Vincent Reeves. So what if he was the commissioner? How could he not listen to the opinions of so many higher-ups in the Herbalist Society?
Kevin, what do you think?
Vincent Reeves did not immediately answer these people's questions, but his eyes remained locked on them as his lips only slightly moved to ask Kevin the question. What do I think?
I have a pretty good idea of what's going on here." Kevin sniffed and let out a cold snort. "Oh, then what did you see?" Vincent Reeves asked with a smile. "I see a few shameless old men trying to shamelessly walk back a fair bet. I also see a coward who is about to suffer the consequences of his own mistakes." Kevin sat in the chair and said loudly. He was doing everything he could to make sure everyone could hear him clearly.
"What did you say, kid?"
The higher-up who had approached the commissioner suddenly turned around and scolded him coldly.
"Do you know who you're talking to? Try telling me I'm a shameless old man again to my face."
"Huh. Why do I have to do that, but you don't have the guts to admit it?" Kevin glanced at the people in front of him with disdain. "Let me ask you, have you ever been to a casino?"
"What do you mean?"
the man asked with a frown. "My meaning is very clear. Since you've been to a casino, have you ever seen gamblers cheat? Have they ever been spared cheating?" Kevin narrowed his eyes and reprimanded. "Since Clint Grayson had the guts to accept this bet, then he must pay the corresponding price. Otherwise, how can the dignified Herbalist Society be fair and just? If word of this matter spreads, won't the commissioner's reputation become a big joke?" Kevin knew he had scored a major point. Making the results of the competition reflect on Vincent Reeves' leadership would surely make the commissioner rethink how the contest was going to end.